The call came into the Flathead County Sheriff's Office at 7:43 p.m. on a Friday in late September, and Deputy Marshal Trenton recognized the particular tone of controlled panic in the caller's voice, the sound of a parent trying desperately to stay rational while fear clawed at their chest. "My sons didn't come home from their hike," Angela Voss said, her words precise despite the tremor underneath. "They left this morning at 8 a.m. for the Cedar Lakes Trail. They were supposed to be back by 6 p.m. It's almost 8 now and they're not answering their phones." Deputy Trenton pulled up his computer screen, already typing notes. Names and ages? Ethan Voss, 19, and Cole Voss, 18. They're experienced hikers. They've been hiking these mountains since they were children. Their father was a wilderness guide before he passed away 3 years ago. My boys know these trails, know the safety protocols, know to stay on marked paths. Something happened. Something's wrong. The certainty in Angela's voice carried weight. Deputy Trenton had been working search and rescue in Flathead County for 12 years, long enough to distinguish between overreacting parents and those whose instincts were genuinely alarmed. Angela Voss fell into the latter category. Which trailhead did they use? Cedar Lakes off Highway 56. They planned to do the full loop, about 8 miles, moderate difficulty. Ethan texted me at 10:47 this morning saying they'd reached the overlook and were taking pictures. That was the last communication. Deputy Trenton felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came with these calls. The Cabinet Mountains wilderness was stunningly beautiful and brutally unforgiving. 94,000 acres of rugged terrain where even experienced hikers could get into trouble if conditions shifted. September weather in Montana was notoriously unpredictable, with afternoon thunderstorms appearing seemingly out of nowhere and temperatures that could drop 40 degrees after sunset. "Mrs. Voss, I'm initiating a search and rescue operation immediately. We'll have teams on the trail within the hour." By 9 p.m., Deputy Trenton stood at the Cedar Lakes trailhead with an assembled team of 12 volunteers from the County Search and Rescue Unit, plus 2 experienced trackers and a handler with a search dog. The parking area held only one vehicle, a 2015 Ford Explorer registered to Ethan Voss, confirming that the young men had indeed started their hike here and hadn't returned. "Standard grid search," Deputy Trenton instructed. "The trail is well marked, but we're looking for any signs they went off path. Broken vegetation, disturbed ground, anything that suggests deviation from the main route. They've been missing for nearly 12 hours now. If they're injured and immobile, they won't have traveled far from the trail. If they're mobile but lost, they could be anywhere within a 5-mile radius." The search team spread out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they called the names Ethan, Cole, into the vast Montana wilderness. The search dog, a German shepherd named Ranger, worked the trail with systematic intensity, nose to the ground, seeking any scent trail that might lead to the missing young men. By midnight, they'd covered the entire 8-mile loop without finding any trace of Ethan or Cole Voss. No abandoned backpacks, no signs of struggle or injury, no indication of where 2 experienced hikers might have gone. "We're standing down until dawn," the search coordinator, a veteran rescue specialist named Patricia Oakes, told Angela Voss, who'd driven to the trailhead and been waiting in her car, wrapped in a blanket, refusing to leave. "Mrs. Voss, darkness makes searching dangerous for our teams and limits what we can see. First light is at 6:30 a.m., We'll have 3 times as many searchers then, helicopter support if weather permits, and thermal imaging equipment that works better in daylight conditions." "They've been out there for 16 hours, Angela said, her voice finally cracking. "It's 43 degrees right now. How cold will it get tonight?" Patricia's expression was compassionate but honest. "Mid-30s, possibly lower at higher elevations. But Mrs. Voss, your sons are young, healthy, and experienced. If they're injured, they'll have found shelter and are waiting for rescue. If they're lost, they'll have the sense to stay put rather than wandering in darkness. Everything you've told us about their background suggests they're capable of surviving a cold night." What Patricia didn't say, what Angela already knew with the terrible clarity that came from having lost a husband to these same mountains 3 years earlier, was that capable of surviving and will survive were not the same thing. The wilderness didn't care about experience or capability. It cared about luck, timing, and the 1,000 small decisions that could mean the difference between making it home and becoming a statistic. 20 miles west of the search area, on a sprawling 600-acre cattle ranch that bordered the national forest, Dalton Kincaid was preparing for Saturday morning's cattle drive with his usual meticulous attention to detail. At 62 years old and a third-generation Montana rancher, Dalton had moved cattle between pastures hundreds of times, but he never treated it as routine. Moving 70 head of cattle, including his prize Hereford bull Redford, across a kilometer of terrain that bordered wilderness required planning, experienced hands, and respect for the unpredictability of both cattle and landscape. "We'll start at first light," Dalton told his two ranch hands, Miguel Cordova and Jesse Whitmore, as they checked saddles and prepared the horses Friday evening. "The south pastures got better grass for fall grazing, and we need to rotate them before the ground freezes. Should be straightforward, follow the fence line east, then turn them through the gate. 3 hours, tops." Miguel, who'd worked cattle for 20 years, nodded. "Redford been behaving lately?" "Solid as always. He'll lead the cows, keep them calm. Never had trouble with him." What none of them knew, what no one could have known, was that this routine cattle drive was about to intersect with a desperate search and rescue operation in a way that would challenge everything Dalton thought he understood about cattle behavior, about coincidence, and about the strange ways that fate sometimes works in the wilderness. As Friday night deepened over Montana, two young men shivered in a hidden canyon miles from any trail, hoping desperately that someone would find them before exposure or dehydration became critical. And a rancher slept peacefully, unaware that his Saturday morning cattle drive was about to become anything but routine. Saturday morning broke clear and cold over Dalton Kincaid's ranch, the temperature hovering at 38 degrees as the sun crested the Cabinet Mountains. Dalton stood in his barn at 6:15 a.m., saddling his quarter-horse mare, Copper, while Miguel and Jesse prepared their own mounts. The plan was simple and familiar: move 70 head of cattle, 68 cows and 2 bulls, including Redford, from the west pasture to the south pasture, where better fall grazing awaited them. "Redford's already got the cows grouped near the gate," Miguel reported, looking through binoculars toward the pasture. "Smart animal knows something's happening." Dalton smiled. Redford was exceptional that way. 6 years old, 2,000 pounds of calm intelligence, a bull who seemed to understand ranch rhythms better than some humans. He naturally positioned himself as herd leader, keeping the cows settled and organized without the aggressive behavior some bulls exhibited. Dalton had raised him from a calf, and the partnership they'd developed was something special. By 7 a.m., the 3 riders were positioned strategically, Dalton at the front left, Miguel at the front right, and Jesse bringing up the rear. The cattle moved out of the west pasture gate in an orderly stream, Redford at the lead as expected, the cows following his steady pace. This was textbook cattle management: calm animals, experienced handlers, familiar terrain. The route followed the ranch's eastern fence line for roughly 800 meters, a well-worn cattle path that paralleled the tree line where Dalton's property bordered national forest land. The morning was quiet except for the sounds of hooves on grass, the creak of saddle leather, and the occasional low call from the cattle communicating with each other. They were approximately 600 meters into the drive when Redford's behavior changed. The massive bull, who'd been maintaining steady forward movement at the front of the herd, suddenly stopped. His head lifted, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. His body language shifted from relaxed to alert, his ears rotating toward the forest. "Boss, Redford's locking up," Miguel called out, immediately recognizing the body language of a bull who'd detected something unusual. Dalton rode Copper closer, trying to read what had captured Redford's attention. The bull was staring intently at the tree line roughly 40 meters to their right, dense Montana forest that dropped into a series of ravines and hidden canyons that Dalton knew existed but rarely entered. The terrain was too rough for cattle, too remote for easy access, the kind of wilderness that swallowed sound and hid secrets in its folds. "Easy, Red," Dalton said, using the shortened name he'd called the bull since calfdom. "Nothing there but trees and rocks. Let's keep moving." But Redford didn't move. Instead, he turned his massive body away from the herd and took 3 deliberate steps toward the forest. "Oh no," Jesse muttered from the rear. "He's fixating on something." Cattle fixation was a known phenomenon, when an animal became focused on a sound, scent, or visual stimulus to the point of ignoring commands and abandoning normal behavior. It was relatively rare in well-trained cattle, but when it happened, forcing the issue often made things worse. Dalton tried the standard redirection techniques, positioning Copper between Redford and the tree line, using voice commands the bull had responded to reliably for years, even pulling out a bucket of grain as incentive. Redford ignored all of it. His attention remained locked on the forest, and with each passing moment, his determination to move in that direction seemed to intensify. "Miguel, you and Jesse hold the herd here," Dalton instructed. "Don't let them scatter. I'm going to follow Redford, see what's got him so fixated. Might be a dead animal, might be nothing. But he's not going to settle until he investigates, and I'm not leaving a $35,000 bull alone in the wilderness to get lost or hurt." "Want me to come with you?" Miguel asked. "No, keep the cows calm. I'll be back in 20 minutes, hopefully with one stubborn bull." Redford had already entered the tree line by the time Dalton urged Copper forward. The bull moved with surprising agility for an animal his size, navigating between pines and over fallen logs with clear purpose. This wasn't wandering. This was directed movement toward a specific destination. Dalton followed on horseback, ducking branches and carefully guiding Copper over uneven terrain. The forest quickly became dense enough that he lost sight of Miguel and Jesse behind him. He could hear Redford ahead, the distinctive sound of a large animal moving through underbrush, but visibility was limited to maybe 30 feet in the thick woods. They'd traveled perhaps 200 meters, farther than Dalton had intended, deeper into terrain he didn't know well, when the forest suddenly opened into a rocky ravine. Redford stood at the edge, looking down into a narrow canyon perhaps 20 feet deep, its bottom obscured by shadow and vegetation. "Red, that's enough," Dalton said firmly, dismounting from Copper. "Whatever you're after isn't worth breaking your legs in a canyon. Let's go back." But Redford made a sound Dalton had never heard from him before, a deep, urgent bellow that carried an almost communicative quality. The bull took 2 careful steps down into the ravine, finding footing on the rocky slope, then stopped and bellowed again, looking back at Dalton as if to say, "Follow me. This is important." "You've got to be kidding me," Dalton muttered. But something about Redford's behavior, the intensity, the persistence, the almost deliberate communication, made him hesitate. This wasn't random fixation. This was something else. Dalton tied Copper's reins to a sturdy pine, grabbed his radio to update Miguel on his position, and carefully began descending into the ravine after his bull. The rocks were loose, the footing treacherous, and Dalton's 62-year-old knees protested every step. But Redford had continued deeper into the narrow canyon, and Dalton could hear the bull had stopped moving, was standing in one spot, bellowing repeatedly. When Dalton finally reached the canyon floor and rounded a large boulder, he stopped cold. 20 feet ahead, partially hidden behind fallen timber and rock, was a small makeshift shelter constructed from pine branches and a tarp. And huddled inside that shelter, wrapped in emergency blankets that looked 3 days old, were 2 young men, one with a clearly splinted leg, both looking at Dalton with expressions of disbelief and desperate hope. "Help," one of them said, his voice hoarse and weak. "Please. We've been stuck here for 3 days. My brother's leg is broken. We can't climb out." Dalton's radio crackled with Miguel's voice. "Boss, you find him?" Dalton pressed the transmit button, his hand shaking. "Miguel, I found him. And Miguel, call 911. Tell them we found the missing hikers. Tell them we need search and rescue at my location immediately. And Miguel, tell them my bull found them, because I don't think anyone's going to believe this otherwise." Dalton stared at the 2 young men for a frozen moment, his rancher's mind trying to process what he was seeing. Redford stood calmly a few feet away, as if satisfied now that his mission was complete, his massive presence somehow reassuring in the narrow canyon. "What are your names?" Dalton asked, already moving toward the shelter, his years of ranch medical experience, treating injured cattle, handling emergencies in remote locations, kicking in automatically. "Ethan Voss," said the one with the splinted leg, his face pale with pain and exhaustion. "This is my brother Cole. We've been here since Wednesday afternoon." 3 days, Dalton confirmed, kneeling beside them and quickly assessing their condition. Ethan's right leg was immobilized with a makeshift splint constructed from branches and what looked like torn clothing. Cole appeared physically uninjured, but was shivering despite the emergency blankets, showing clear signs of dehydration and exposure. Wednesday, we were taking photos from an overlook, Cole explained, his voice raspy. The ground gave way. Ethan fell about 15 feet before catching on a ledge. His leg broke on impact. I climbed down to him, but the rock face is too sheer for me to carry him back up, and he can't put weight on the leg. We had some supplies in our packs, water bottles, protein bars, emergency blankets, but we ran out of food yesterday and water this morning. Dalton pulled his radio. Miguel, you get through to 911? Yes, boss. They're dispatching search and rescue helicopter from Kalispell. ETA approximately 40 minutes. They need GPS coordinates. Dalton read out his location from his phone's GPS app, then added, Tell them one patient with a compound leg fracture, both patients showing signs of dehydration and exposure. They'll need medical equipment to stabilize the fracture before transport. He turned back to the brothers. Search and rescue is coming. You're going to be okay. How did you find us? Ethan asked, tears suddenly streaming down his face. The tears of someone who'd been holding terror at bay for 3 days and could finally let it break. We've been yelling, trying to signal, but this canyon, the sound doesn't carry. We heard the helicopter yesterday searching, but they were too far away. We thought no one would find us in time. Dalton glanced at Redford, who was placidly chewing on some grass that grew near the canyon wall, as if this entire detour had been a perfectly normal part of his Saturday routine. Honestly, my bull found you. I was moving my herd to another pasture, and Redford refused to stay with the group. He fixated on this direction, wouldn't respond to any commands, just insisted on coming into these woods. Led me straight here. Your bull? Cole said, looking at the massive Hereford with disbelief. How is that even possible? I have no idea, Dalton admitted. I've been ranching for 40 years. I've never seen behavior like this. Cattle don't track humans. They don't conduct search and rescue operations, but Redford did exactly that. While they waited for the helicopter, Dalton did what he could to help. He had water in his pack, which he carefully rationed to the dehydrated brothers, and a first aid kit that included pain medication he administered to Ethan. He radioed Miguel to bring Copper closer to the ravine edge with additional supplies from his saddlebags. Your mother's been searching, Dalton told them. The whole county's been searching. You boys have a lot of people who care about you. We tried to be smart, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. We stayed put once I was injured. We rationed our supplies. We built shelter. We did everything right. But this canyon, it's not visible from above, not on any trail maps. We were invisible. Not to Redford, Dalton said, looking again at his bull. The animal had saved 2 lives today through behavior that defied logical explanation. Whether it was extraordinary scent detection, some instinct humans didn't understand, or pure chance that led Redford to this exact hidden canyon, Dalton would probably never know. 38 minutes after Dalton's 911 call, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors echoed through the canyon. The search and rescue team worked with practiced efficiency, rappelling down with medical equipment, stabilizing Ethan's leg with professional splints, setting up a harness system to lift both brothers to safety. Angela Voss was waiting at the hospital in Kalispell when her sons arrived, and the reunion was captured by news crews who'd been following the search story. But the detail that captured everyone's attention, the element that turned a successful rescue into a viral story that spread across Montana and beyond, was the answer to one question. How were they found after 3 days when dozens of professional searchers couldn't locate them? A bull, Dalton Kincaid told the reporters, still somewhat stunned by the entire experience. My Hereford bull named Redford. He broke away from a cattle drive, led me straight to a hidden canyon, and refused to leave until I followed him down and found those boys. I don't know how to explain it. I just know it happened. Within 24 hours, Redford had become famous. Local news stations ran the story first, but by Monday morning it had been picked up by national media. Montana bull saves 2 missing hikers appeared in headlines across the country, accompanied by photos of Redford standing calmly in his pasture, while Dalton recounted the improbable rescue. Dalton's phone rang constantly, reporters requesting interviews, animal behavior scientists wanting to study Redford, even a producer from a morning talk show inviting them to appear on television. Dalton declined most requests, uncomfortable with the attention and skeptical that he could explain what had happened in any way that made sense. Dr. Helena Pritchard, a veterinarian and animal behaviorist from Montana State University, drove to the ranch Tuesday morning with permission to examine Redford and interview Dalton. After spending 3 hours observing the bull and reviewing the timeline of events, she sat with Dalton in his kitchen, attempting to offer explanations. Cattle have extraordinary olfactory capabilities, Dr. Pritchard explained. They can detect scents from remarkable distances. It's possible Redford smelled something, perhaps the tarp material from the emergency blankets, or human scent carried on air currents, that triggered his interest. But he'd have to smell it from 600 meters away, Dalton countered, through dense forest, and then navigate directly to a hidden canyon he'd never been to before. Which is the part that defies easy explanation, Dr. Pritchard admitted. Cattle are intelligent animals with complex social behaviors and environmental awareness that we're still discovering. What Redford did falls outside normal documented behavior patterns. However, that doesn't make it supernatural, just currently unexplained. Ethan and Cole Voss were released from the hospital on Wednesday. Ethan would need surgery to properly set his leg, followed by months of physical therapy, but doctors were optimistic about full recovery. Cole had suffered no lasting physical effects from the 3-day ordeal beyond minor dehydration. On Thursday, Angela Voss brought her sons to Dalton's ranch. The meeting was emotional, Angela embracing Dalton with tears streaming down her face, thanking him repeatedly for saving her children. "I didn't save them," Dalton said quietly. "Redford did. I just followed." They walked to the pasture where Redford grazed peacefully with the cows, seemingly unaware of or unconcerned with his celebrity status. Ethan, moving carefully on crutches, approached the fence and looked at the massive bull who had, inexplicably, saved his life. "Thank you," Ethan said simply, his voice breaking with emotion. "I don't understand how you found us. I don't understand why you led Dalton to that canyon. But you did, and Cole and I are alive because of it." Redford raised his head, regarded the young man with calm, intelligent eyes, then returned to grazing as if accepting the thanks as his due. Angela turned to Dalton. "I need you to understand something. My husband died in these mountains 3 years ago. He was an experienced wilderness guide, knew these trails better than anyone. But he got caught in an unexpected storm, suffered a heart attack, and died before anyone could reach him. When my boys disappeared in the same wilderness, I thought history was repeating itself. I thought I was going to lose them too." Her voice broke completely. "But you and Redford, you broke that pattern. You gave me my sons back. There aren't words adequate to thank you for that." Dalton, uncomfortable with emotion but understanding its depth, simply nodded. "I'm glad we were in the right place at the right time." "It was more than that," Angela insisted. "It was miracle. However you explain it, animal instinct, coincidence, divine intervention, 2 young men are alive today because a bull refused to follow a normal cattle drive and insisted on entering a forest. That's not just luck. That's something profound." The story eventually faded from headlines as new news took its place, but in Montana, particularly in Flathead County, Redford's rescue became local legend. Dalton declined all offers to sell the bull, amused by the assumption that fame had increased his market value. "He's worth the same now as before," Dalton told one persistent buyer. "He's a working ranch bull, not a circus attraction, and he's staying right here where he belongs." 3 months later, as winter settled over Montana, Redford remained exactly what he'd always been, a calm, reliable, exceptional Hereford bull who did his job without drama or fanfare, his brief moment of inexplicable heroism just another day in a life well lived. 1 year after the rescue, on a crisp September morning, Dalton Kincaid stood at his pasture fence watching Redford lead the herd toward fresh grazing. The massive Hereford was now 7 years old, still calm, still reliable, still the natural leader of Dalton's cattle operation. The media attention had long since faded, though occasionally a journalist would call requesting an anniversary interview. Dalton always politely declined. The rescue hadn't changed Redford. Why should it change how Dalton treated him? But the rescue had changed others. Ethan Voss had fully recovered from his leg injury and was now studying wilderness medicine at the University of Montana, determined to help others who found themselves in desperate situations like the one Redford had saved him from. Cole had joined the Flathead County Search and Rescue Team as a volunteer, bringing the perspective of someone who'd been on the receiving end of a rescue operation. Angela Voss visited Dalton's ranch every few months, always bringing fresh-baked goods and spending time at Redford's fence, quietly thanking the bull who'd given her sons back to her. Dr. Pritchard's study of the rescue had been published in a veterinary behavior journal, concluding that while Redford's actions couldn't be fully explained by current understanding of bovine behavior, they fell within the realm of animal capabilities that science was still discovering. Her final line had resonated with Dalton. Perhaps the most important lesson is that animals are more perceptive, more capable, and more connected to their environment than we typically acknowledge. On this particular morning, as Dalton watched Redford move through the pasture with his characteristic calm competence, Miguel joined him at the fence. "You ever figure out how he knew?" Miguel asked, the question they'd discussed countless times over the past year. "No," Dalton admitted, "and I've made peace with not knowing. Maybe he smelled something. Maybe he heard something. Maybe it was pure chance that he fixated on that direction. Or maybe," he paused, watching Redford nuzzle a calf, "maybe animals understand things about this world that we've forgotten or never learned." "Think he knows he's a hero?" Dalton smiled. "I think he knows he's a well-fed bull with a good life. That's probably enough for him." Redford raised his massive head, looked directly at Dalton as if he'd heard and agreed, then returned to the simple, profound work of being exactly what he was: a ranch bull, a herd leader, and on one September day when two young men needed him most, an inexplicable savior. Some mysteries didn't need solving, some miracles didn't need explaining. Sometimes it was enough to simply be grateful that on a routine cattle drive, one stubborn bull had refused to follow the path everyone expected, and in doing so, had changed everything. The legend of Redford would be told in Montana for generations. The bull who saved two lives by breaking the rules, following his instincts, and reminding humans that the natural world still held wonders they couldn't fully comprehend. And Redford, oblivious to or unconcerned with his legacy, simply continued being the best bull he knew how to be, which, as it turned out, was more than enough.